Animals are all-round amazing creatures with a knack for sensing when their owners are feeling low. They always know when to provide their owner with some much-needed cheer, which is why they deserve to be looked after and spoiled in the best way possible. So many people are being treated badly, and it's important to love and care for them just like animals do. They also deserve a good home and someone who cares about them. It isn't always the case that animals are brought home because they're cute and cuddling. They might also be brought in to help a family or provide company to an elderly person, even if they're just once in a while. But it's not always just about being cute and cuddling. Other factors come into play as well. They do not realize that things like a little puppy are often like taking care of a toddler. They think that they can manage, but for whatever reason, they can't. Animal shelters in the Sacramento area know this far too well. Just like their colleagues all over the world, these animal shelters are overcrowded, and often they have to take extraordinary measures to take care of all the animals in their shelters. This often means that they have to find foster families to take care of them. Chunk was one of those unfortunate souls. Most of the time when animals are abandoned, it's at a much later stage of their life. Their owners no longer have their cuteness to excuse their behavior, and they leave them out on the street. Chunk, however, was 3 months old when he was abandoned, which makes the story much sadder. It started with firefighter Mike Thorley getting ready for a completely normal day at work. Mike had been a firefighter for quite a few years, and he was used to extraordinary rescues. He had dedicated his life to rushing into burning buildings and pulling out those who needed his help. He had gone through extensive training, and he was willing to lay down his life for the service of others. What he didn't expect was to rescue a puppy that day. On his way to work, Mike said goodbye to his family, as he normally did, and headed into the station. His colleagues greeted him and told him about the previous shift's report. Firefighters served a long shift, and they often slept at the station overnight. That meant that the station was very homely, with a kitchen bedroom and a living room with a big TV. What it didn't have, of course, was a dog. Mike had been told that the previous night's shift had been rather quiet, and he didn't expect this one to be any different. There were certain times of year that the fires were worse, and this wasn't one of them. He settled into a relatively relaxing shift and chatted with the colleagues that he had worked with for quite some time. When they were called out, however, he moved quickly. As a firefighter, they were trained to move as quickly as they could, getting dressed and sliding down the pole at the same time. He and his colleagues grabbed Sacramento Fire Engine 14 and hid out to the call. They knew 1 second of delay could be the difference between life or death, and they never wanted to be the ones at fault. Most of their attention was focused on the road, but it seemed that Mike luckily turned his head at just the right moment. He couldn't believe what he saw on the side of the road. It went by so fast that he thought he imagined it, until another one of his colleagues confirmed that they had also seen it. There were a few people on the side of the road, near 12th and North B. She was nearly hairless, tied up, and to make matters worse, it was starting to rain heavily. Mike and his colleagues knew that there was nothing they could do in the moment. They had to get to the fire, and quickly. However, throughout the entire call, Mike could not get the image of the puppy out of his head. As soon as they were done, and everyone was luckily all right, Mike convinced his colleagues to go past the spot where the puppy had been tied up. The situation was even worse than he thought. When he got up close, he could see that the little puppy's front legs were swollen, and she was shivering. It broke Mike's heart to see such a thing. He knew that sometimes puppies escaped or they were abandoned at a shelter because their humans couldn't take care of them for whatever reason. However, this was much worse than that. Someone had clearly done this on purpose, and to Mike, that was the worst thing they could do. From what Mike could see, the puppy was a pit bull puppy, which made matters worse. You have to help the puppies out when you can, especially the pit bulls. Thorley said, "They are definitely discriminated against." Mike had been a pit bull owner for 17 years. He knew that pit bull thought that pit bulls were very aggressive, and he knew that there were some places in the world where pit bulls were banned, which he didn't really think was fair. Pit bulls were not an aggressive breed because there was no such thing as an aggressive breed. It was simply that the dogs got a bad reputation, and these stories made the news.
Also, if you've not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these animal stories every day. Now, back to the story.
It was the middle of the night, and the crew knew that the shelters likely weren't open to accept a puppy. In addition, the little puppy looked so sad and miserable that they really didn't want to abandon her to a shelter. If she was tied up on the side of the road, she had been abandoned and she was scared. As kind as the shelter staff was, they knew that it was unlikely that she would sit alone in a cage for hours or days because the shelters were overstretched. It was a unanimous decision to help her and to have all of them pitch in together. Fire engine driver Peter van der Leus said the crew cared for her before bringing her to the shelter. "We checked her out, cut the cord that she was tied up to. We wrapped her up in the blanket, threw her in the fire engine, and took her back to the firehouse and gave her a little bath." Peter said they were lucky that the rest of the night was very quiet and so they could dedicate time to taking care of her. As for the name, Thorley said he and the fight who always joked about having a fire station dog named Chunk. She was a good size, despite being so young, and the crew saw that she quickly warmed up to them. Within a few hours, she was the playful puppy that she deserved to be. They played with her for most of the night and got her some food and water. She seemed to be settling into the firehouse quite well. She seemed to particularly take to Mike, and she spent a good amount of time snuggled up against him. He fell in love with her right away, and the crew decided in the morning to not take her to a shelter right away. "We would take this one in for a little while and try to find her a home." Thorley. They decided that the least they could do was ask around and see if any of their friends or family wanted the puppy. Thorley decided that he was going to take a picture of his find and send the text to his wife and daughters who were just waking up for the day. This picture was met with instant admiration. They asked for more pictures and videos, and since there were no other calls, Mike was happy to oblige. He did not know what kind of horrible past Chunk had, but he knew that she seemed happy to just be a puppy again. Eventually, it was decided that it would be Thorley himself who took the puppy home for foster care. They had a full house, but he knew he could manage for just a little while. The firehouse, while a lovely place, had many people coming and going and lots of different schedules. So Mike decided that it wasn't the best place for a growing puppy who needed constant attention. Once Chuck came home with him, it was instant love. Thorley's wife, Carla, said that despite her 3 teenagers falling in love with Chunk, the family has not made a firm decision on whether or not they will take in the puppy. "After foster care, we get a busy home with 3 girls and 2. Carla said, adding that her husband has a big heart. She has a big soft spot for animals. Chunk was not making the decision to let her go any easier. She immediately fit right in with the rest of the family, and she snuggled right up to the other dogs or followed the girls around. It was like she had been there all along, and there was nothing anyone could do to change it." Carla smiled as she watched Chunk. Over the next few days, they took her to her shelter to make sure that she was healthy. It turned out that she needed some antibiotics and would require constant care from the shelter or from a foster. Bobby Mann, spokesman for the shelter, said Chunk is on antibiotics and would require continuous care until she is healed, provided free by the shelter until she is fit to be in a permanent home. About 11,000 stray, sick, or injured animals are dropped off at the shelter every year, Mann said. The shelter is able to give free care for Chunk and other animals because of public donations. Her story made its rounds in the news, and it wasn't long before donations poured in to help her. Chunk was found with a non-contagious form of mange caused by tiny mites in the skin. None of this mattered, however, to the fire crew and the Thorley family. "We all kind of just fell in love with her," van der Leus said. It wasn't long before the fire crew and the Thorley family made a permanent decision to keep Chunk. They would care for her, and Mike would bring her into the fire station often. Whatever care she needed would be provided for her, and she would never know the feeling of being abandoned or tied up again. Chunk was a happy ending, but there are many animals sitting in the shelter system that are at risk of not quite so happy endings. This story warms our hearts, but also reminds us to donate where we can to all the souls that cannot take care of themselves. Perhaps there will soon be another Chunk looking for the perfect home. Because of our goodwill, she will find it. The love that animals give us in return is far worth any donation we can provide.